All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Tom Lane. I will be presenting the webinar for you today. We're going to have roughly about 1 hour presentation. It's called the Introduction to Growing BSF at Professional Level. Our hosts today will be Uka Marjanen, the CEO of Manna Insect, and a black soldier fly production consultant, Saverio Danubio from Italy. Before we get actually started and let these guys present their case, just a couple of small things regarding the presentation itself. First of all, you're all being muted. If you have any questions, please add those to the chat. We will cover all the questions, or if there are overlapping questions, and of course within time, how many questions there may be, we will cover the questions at the end of the session. If you have any questions that you'd prefer asking privately, or if you come up with questions later on after the presentation, or if you're viewing this from a recording, then of course feel free to contact us at www.mannainsect.com. If you wish to follow us on LinkedIn, you can of course go to the Manna Insect LinkedIn page and follow up on what's happening. We're sharing a lot of stats and research and studies regarding rearing insects at professional level. I will also add my personal LinkedIn profile link to the chat soon, and I'm sure that Saverio and Uka would be interested in networking with you on LinkedIn as well. So you can either find them on LinkedIn, or if a gentleman can add their LinkedIn profile links to the chat later on. Our technical host is Jonas Vilanen, who will be answering any technical questions in the chat, if there are any, hopefully not. And yeah, let's get started. Let me introduce you to Uka and Saverio. Welcome, gentlemen. The room is yours.
Hey, welcome guys from my behalf as well. Pretty excited. This is our first webinar and an introduction, and we will brush on many topics today fairly quickly in about 40 minutes, and we will continue in the following monthly webinars in more detail. The principal and purpose of this webinar was that we've been around in this industry for several years. We've had to do many things in practice and learn in practice, and we really wanted to give you all the advice and our experience as concretely as possible in this webinar, and then hopefully give you something to get started before you go into large scale and millions of dollars and thousands of tons. Tom already introduced me, so I have probably the most difficult 3-letter first name. We've had hundreds of telcos. That's the first thing I typically do, is to pronounce my name right. Uka. I'm the CEO of Manna Insect, and we as Manna Insect, we're a Finnish company working almost in Lapland under fairly harsh conditions for this species, and really focused on how do we do it profitably in small scale and create simple technical solutions for everyone. I will let my colleague Saverio introduce himself, and then he can start introducing black soldier fly larvae and get started.
Hello everybody, and welcome here to the first Manna Insect webinar. I'm honored to be here, and as previously said, I'm a sustainable solutions developer, and I have been working with black soldier flies as well as with other macroinvertebrates, and I will accompany you in this journey through the black soldier fly professional farming. So here we have our champion in bioconversion, the black soldier fly, also called scientific name Hermetia lucens, and it's a fly. Yes, it has something in common with the housefly that almost everybody knows, but there are some differentiation that make these insects very interesting, especially for business. As all the other flies, it counts 4 main stages: the egg, the larvae, the pupae, and the fly stages. And the most interesting is absolutely the larval stage, where the insect is capable to consume a large amount of organic matter in a very reduced, relatively short time. And what makes black swordfly better or preferable compared to other insects is that it's very robust and versatile, especially when it's in adult larval stage. So the insect is already present on the 5 continents, and there might be no problem in rearing it in every country. The life cycle of these insects is generally of 6 weeks, but conditions always can make it longer. And the residues obtained from the black swordfly farming, it's called frass, and it can be a good fertilizer that contains nitrogen, phosphor, potassium, and other elements that are good for the agriculture.
Okay, so we want to cover, and we had on the topic or title the word professional, and we want to a little bit clarify what we need. The professional doesn't directly mean that you have to be large scale, but it means that you're doing it as a profession. You are actually making a profitable business out of it. So there are a few requirements that you have to be aware when you're doing that, especially compared to, let's say, a backyard as a hobby rearing. The one thing that is definitely important is that you need to be predictable in production, which is a challenging part with this species. That basically what it requires is a controlled environment for both breeding and rearing, because even in optimal conditions, you will have, let's say, weather changes that will significantly drop your production capacity, and in professional levels, you can't do that. Also, the big difference is that you are upcycling biowaste streams that come from industry or from local markets in ton level, and you need to optimize the recipes, and you need to know the feed conversion rates on those different substrates. And most importantly, you need to be very, very cost aware in your running costs and capex, because we want you to make this as a profitable business, and we've been really focused on making sure that BSF production can be profitable even at a small scale level as well.
Some examples of business. Black swordfly rearing and insect rearing, it's quite recent. I mean, in the mainstream, it's quite recent, but there are already some excellence in the different level of business that is possible to realize with the black swordfly. There are excellent companies in the bio-waste handling, in the medium and large scale insect meal production, in the decentralized insect meal production for the bio-waste handling, on-site farm level small scale rearing, solutions provider for entrepreneurs and companies, because every day a new insect-oriented company is emerging. There are young entrepreneurs that are putting their enthusiasm and their dreams into the insect professional activity, and it's important to provide the right services, the right software and hardware to this new entrepreneur, as well for the eggs productions that sometimes can be self-produced, but in some other cases the business might be calibrated in a way that purchasing eggs is the best solution. And then there are other cases. There are companies not mentioned that operate on the big plants realizations, other that are in the medical, in the cosmetics, and on the market are already available some beauty creams that contain black swordfly oil and energy. That it's another interesting sector when, for example, black swordflies are not viable for the ordinary protein and fertilizer productions.
Okay, this might be boring for some people, but let's go over some basics in terminology just to make sure that we understand each other. We typically talk about BSF, or maybe in research BSFL, explicitly meaning larvae. But as black swordfly is such a long name, we like to shorten it to BSF. And in BSF, when we talk about breeding BSF or rearing BSF or nursing BSF or post-processing BSF, we, based on the context, we mean mainly about the larvae, but sometimes we mean the fly. But it's just easier to say BSF. Typically after hatching, eggs hatching, we talk about neonates. Those are typically very young, some hours old larvae that are hatched, and we want to then continue to nurse them into larvae. And in that stage, we have two phases. We have the juvenile, so to speak, which are nursed to 5 to 7 day old, and DOL is another word for days old. And then we continue to actually rear them into an adult, and let's say up to 21 days in the normal circumstances, and harvest them before they prepupate, that where they stop eating and start turning into very dark color and only care about escaping and going to someplace dark and dry, to then become pupa, which basically looks like a dead larvae, but finally will emerge as a fly. And then another terminology, which at least me personally is always difficult. Do I speak about substrate? Do I speak about biowaste? Do I speak about side stream or insect feed? Whatever we speak, we basically mean food for the larvae. And it can be vegetables, meat, manure, anything what is convenient in that case.
Continuing with the terminology, that is very important. I realize myself that sometimes I use very strict terminology, and if something is not clear in my presentation, I invite everybody to comment in the chat. There is a breeding, and breeding includes all the activity where the adults are in the act of mating and laying the eggs. The rearing part is instead the central area of the black swordfly activity, where the larvae are in contact with the organic matter, the substrate, and they reduce it, incorporating nutrients and getting fatter. The systems in general can be considered as a batch or continuous. Batch when in the core part of the activity, the organic waste reduction, there is a loading of the organic matter and of the larvae, and then an unloading when it's all the nutrients are finished and the larvae are mature enough, and then another batch is started. In the continuous area, differently, there is a loading and unloading that is continuous. And then there is the pre and post-processing. These may change a lot according to what exactly your insect business is, but there is always, unless you're very lucky in identifying an ideal substrate, a pre-processing where you have to dewater, crush your substrate, or a post-processing where you have at least separate as happens all the time, the larvae from the frass, and so you have a sieving, and then eventually you can further process the larvae into drying, crushing, defatting, freezing, and packaging. Another term that is important, and Uka already mentioned that, is the food conversion rate, where it's the ratio between the kilograms of larvae obtained per kg of wet substrate.
And let's say the one important terminology I come across when speaking in our cases and small production compared to a large production is the centralized versus decentralized. In most of the news and links and what you will hear articles are about millions invested in big production plants or centralized production, which covers all the processes under one roof, from pre-processing to rearing and breeding and post-processing. And typically the scale or the aim is to scale to thousands of tons in one location. We're talking millions of dollars of investments. It's typically run by one company, and the end products are highly processed for the feed industry, the pet food industry. So typically an end customer like a chicken grower is not the customer, but a feed company that will mix it and then resell it. In a decentralized production, which is definitely now a more emerging field, the processes, the rearing and breeding are done in different places. There might be multiple locations for the rearing part. They might be on site. They might be near chickens, or they might be near the biowaste sources. The starting investments are in some tens of thousands of dollars. There are multiple companies involved. There's an ecosystem of players that are specialized in egg production or rearing or post-processing and so on. And the end products are much more variant, from feeding larvae live directly on site to then post-processing to different forms. But like I said, this is a very emerging market and area, and there's not like a clear process yet how to do it.
And now the principle of rearing black soldier fly. Everything starts with one tray, and this is really iconic. In the next slide, everything will be really clear to everybody. But what happens in one tray is the base for what then is modular and scaled to millions of units. So inside one tray, the tray, first of all, is usually made of plastic, and it's a 600 by 400 tray, and the height can vary a little bit, but those that we suggest to use are 145 millimeters. Inside the tray, it goes the processed substrate and the juvenile larvae. We suggest an amount that can be equivalent to 8,000 larvae, and with the Manna system, is possible to obtain this amount of larvae with a relatively quite little amount of eggs, 0.3 grams. But keep in mind that maybe for your business, you have to see how good is your ability to hatch the higher number of eggs and obtain these good results. The climate conditions in this phase can be different. As we have said before, the larvae is a very robust animal and can perform in a wide range of temperature and humidity, but the optimal conditions that we suggest is 28 degrees, 70% relative humidity, and ventilation. Ventilation is very important. That's why the tray should be stackable, as you can see in the representation, but should first of all allow a good ventilation. With these optimal parameters, the rearing period could be of 10 days, but if the conditions are not optimal, it can be even double the days. And the rearing method suggested it's the batch.
So if you simplify scaling the BSF production, basically you take that one tray and then multiply those trays as much as you would like to have an output. And then of course, that's not so simple. At the end, you need to optimize everything around that. But in principle, what we want to do is make the BSF, the larvae, do the work in a as good environment as possible. But if you go step by step, you basically start at the micro level, and we definitely recommend for you to get your hands dirty, buy 10 trays, get some room in your garage or backyard, and then learn the basics. You basically don't need any equipment to do that, but it's very important that you start understanding the different guidelines. And then it's fairly easy to jump into a mini scale. You're already upcycling 5 to 10 tons biowaste in a month. You can start business validating. You can deliver batches to different companies and maybe to a local chicken grower, and you can start testing different biowaste recipes. You're still very simple in the equipment, and you can use a warehouse or a small place for it. And then you can continue going to small scale. The big difference is that you put a little bit more effort on pre and post processing equipment, that they scale, and you're already doing, let's say, 20 to 50 tons of biowaste per month, producing 5 to 10 tons of live larvae. And now you can start a real business at this level. And now comes let's say the important part is that you have two options. You can continue in a decentralized environment and then start adding multiple locations, or then you can jump into a centralized plant where you commit to more a one location and you start automating the equipment and then go into a very large scale.
Okay, the overview of what we presented already may look like in this image. So there is the biowaste that is crushed, is processed in order to answer the minimum requirement for the substrate to be available for the larvae, and the 5 days old larvae that are loaded together with the substrate in the trays, and then the trays are stuck and loaded on the pallets. They are then moved in the rearing container, where at the end of the 10 or more days rearing, there will be the trays that contain the mature larvae and the fresh. Through the sieving, it's possible to separate these two main products. And then, as anticipated before, there might be a more or less complex post-processing that may end at the sieving or proceed with another 2-3 steps with the drying, with the oil pressing, and then the packaging of the final products. And all of this obviously requires also a general idea of what is the support infrastructure, the space you need, the water, electricity, the human resources, and pallet mover, and so on.
To continue with the breeding process, which can be integrated or can be a totally separate process, or even can be outsourced to another company. After collecting the eggs, the important part is nursing the eggs to juvenile larvae for the 5 to 7 days, and about 95% of that can be then moved to the actual rearing process, and 5% of the larvae will continue into an internal pupa rearing, which takes about an extra week compared to a normal harvesting or normal rearing process. And then after sieving, you can load the pupa back to the breeding environment to produce new flies that will then mate and produce new eggs. And with this about 5%, let's say, part of the total egg production, you can keep the level that you are producing fairly well.
Okay, it's also important to give an idea of how easy or complicated the breeding could be and why some business decide to have an internal breeding area, or some others go and supply for eggs outside. In general, for breeding, it's necessary to have cages of a certain dimension. The important thing is that these cages contain a net or a window. Everything lets the natural and artificial light to go through, because it's important for stimulate the adult fly and then to mate. And then there is a pupa box, because at the end of the container rearing, when the larvae consume all the nutrients and becomes a pupae, then we recover the pupae and we move them in the pupa box, and the pupa box is placed inside the cage. In this way, when the pupa will become an adult, will be released in the cage and will be ready for the mating. The eggs produced after the mating, it would be ideal to collect them in an egg trap in order to do not disperse them in the cage, and also to facilitate the operations of the eggs collecting and removing from the wooden sticks. The climate conditions, if before we said that the larvae is very robust and the conditions can vary a little bit, in this case conditions become more strict and becomes more relevant for a successful result of the breeding operation. So these are the ideal conditions, but obviously according to your insect business, this would be easy or very hard to achieve. In a controlled system like the Manna container, everything is precise and well calibrated. So we can, for example, decide to set the temperature at 28 degrees and 75% relatively humidity, and the ventilation should be low, and the light, as said before, it's important for the mating of the adults. So also the harvesting time, it's quite subjective. It can be every day, it can be every 2 days. In the case of the Manna system, it's every 2 days.
Yeah, and I have to add at this point that unfortunately at this first webinar, we cannot go into details, but we plan to go into a very detailed guidelines on how we do each part, and we want to give you a very concrete, practical way. It's not the only way to do it, but we've done it for 3 years, and we're happy to share how we've done every part. So what comes after the egg collection? This is the way we have done nursing. To make it as simple as possible, we have the same type of trays with a cover. We can use a let's say a more higher quality substrate as part of the nursing, because we want to get them a good head start, and they're not eating at that much, so it's not a huge cost. In our model, we take and weigh 10 grams of eggs and put it under in a hatching structure inside each of these trays, and then we stack them up. And in the case of nursing, you want a fairly high temperature. The humidity is kept with the cover, so you don't need to control the humidity so precisely. You don't need that much ventilation because the larvae are still very young. And then you nurse them from 5 to 7 days, depending on what is a convenient process schedule for you.
Okay, at this point, there are the principles of the rearing. Rearing is the core part of most of the black fly business. And recapping, we have the stack of the trays that usually is placed on the pallets, and it can be in a system that can be batch or can be continuous. The experience say that in general, working with a batch, it's much better for many reasons. And the time of the substrate consumption, according to the conditions, can be of 10 or more days, up to 14 or even 20 if the conditions are not ideal. The dimension of the trays are known, and the standards one are 600 by 400. The height is in the one we suggest to use is 145, and the amount of the substrate that depends a lot on the kind of substrate, the composition, the structure, how facilitates the attack of the larvae to the nutrients for absorbing them. But it can be between 5 and 8 kg. The height of the substrate is also important because larvae do not swim like they need a certain consistency. They have to move properly. But these are all factors that once you decide to work with a specific substrate, then you can easily adjust. The quantity of larvae, as mentioned before, it could be according to these parameters around 8,000 larvae, 5 days old, and the initial grams of eggs you can imagine to use. It's really according to your ability or according to your how should I say, hardware and tools available for obtaining an almost optimal hatching. And the temperature can vary between the 26 and 34 degrees, as well as the humidity between 50 and 75, and the ventilation should be high. These are factors that do not, if you are in this range, do not interrupt the black fly rearing, but actually the optimal range could be actually during the rearing phase, variate according to your substrate and variate according to the size and the moment that your larvae have. So it would be ideal to modulate these parameters during the larvae growing.
Yeah, a little bit about the pre and post processing, because this is an interesting topic, especially considering that if you are on a large scale, everything is automated, everything is like a large scale and large capacity, and of course that means costly and high power consuming. But there is a way to do it in a small scale in a very simplified way, and the minimal equipment you need is a vegetable crusher. The picture here, the 3D model, is basically the one that we've used for several years. We have never needed to add or dewater, but that's a substrate that we've used, but that's a possibility depending on what you're using, and then you might need to mix if you're using different substrates. But the pre-processing can be very simple in itself. Also, the post-processing is let's say a challenging topic in a small scale. If you want to go all the way to a defected insect meal, the easy part is a vibrating sieve, which you can separate the frass and larvae together. And after that, the question is that what do you want to do with the larvae? You can dry it. That's also a fairly simple. Still, you can use a drum dryer or an oven. The defatting, the oil press are a little bit trickier to do in a smaller scale. Typically, the investments are fairly high for this level of production. So it might be a more optimal to have a centralized post-processing for multiple rearing sites. And then at the end, it's how you package the larvae. But in our case, we've actually managed very well of just sieving and then utilizing the larvae as is alive.
Business cases. As we have seen before, the business related to the black sworded fly can vary enormously, and also the business model behind how you make profit with the black sworded fly can really be different from one case to another. There is no mistake. There is no company doing better than another, but it's just according to your necessity or your opportunities to modulate the business in the right way. In some cases, companies decide to produce a premium product and to start from even food grade organic matter source for the substrate. So they pay relatively a lot, or they pay something upfront, and then they obtain a premium product that it makes sense because eventually it gives that quality that then justify also a very laborious post-processing and a high added value. In some other cases, the substrate has a minimum cost and the final product is still of a good quality. In some other case, the substrate becomes your source of revenue because maybe it's polluted, because maybe it's subjected to a specific fee. And in this case, the revenue comes in the upstream part. So if the larvae are still eligible for a feed market, it's okay. Otherwise, there are other options, as it's been showed before that, for example, larvae can be used in the energy sector. From the oil, biodiesel can be produced, and from the other solid parts, biochemicals can be produced. So there is always a way to make a business with the black sworded fly.
So we want to give you an example calculation because when we started and we didn't really find anything practical, and those, let's say, automated large scale plants and companies don't share their cost structure and how they've calculated. And we have always been a little bit in a different space because we've focused on mini and small scale and making that as a profitable model. And to give you an overview and an example calculation, the initial investment cost is that to be a professional, you unfortunately need a climatized environment for rearing, and then either a climatized environment for the breeding, or optionally you will purchase eggs from a third-party source. But you still need a minimal pre and post processing equipment at this level, and then some level of warehouse and supportive equipment, like maybe a pallet truck like we had in our case. And then the running costs comprise of electricity cost, labor, biowaste cost, like Saverio explained in the previous slide. There might be that you will get an income from the biowaste. Typically, it's about zero cost, or you will have to pay the logistics cost. So there's some cost with the biowaste that is available for you. Then, very importantly, the eggs / neonates, nursed neonates, you have to. That's a very, let's say, important and critical part of the cost structure. And then the loan payments and the depreciation value, and these should be included as well. Here is an example of the calculator that is available in our website. It's still a simple calculation and doesn't include everything, but we wanted to give you something that has shows concrete numbers that you can play around. So in this example, you want to upcycle 9 tons per month. You pay $5 per ton to get the biowaste delivered to you. you pay about $5 an hour for a labor workforce. The basic electricity cost now, unfortunately, the electricity is a big thing. It's quadruple, at least in Europe. So 20 cents a kilowatt hour is unfortunately a norm these days. And then a estimation of own production of eggs is about $0.50 a gram. Of course, this will vary depending on where do you get the eggs. And you can have a, let's say, a soy meal price. We haven't really talked about this, but in our case, we compare BSF as a replacement for soy meal, and we want to create models where it's price competitive to soy meal directly. And then you can estimate the live larvae price and the organic fertilizer price that you could get as an income. And if you want to do, let's say, a defatted insect meal, you can more or less quadruple that price compared to how much less you will get and how much higher costs are. But let's say the reference is always as a live larvae. And based on these values, you will get in our case, it means one rearing container, about 18 hours of work, and importantly about 400 grams of eggs to get the full capacity. And with the 1.4 tons of live larvae and 2.2 tons of RAS, you're able to convert that into a business of about $1,700 a month. And then on the right side, you have the cost structure. And with this, you can play around and see that where is the biggest bottleneck and the biggest contributor of the cost structure, putting different numbers. And then you would get a profitable end result, which is, of course, mainly for the rearing and production part. And then you have to calculate the depreciation and the possible warehouse rents and such. But you get an idea in which case scenario, bio-waste input and then larvae and frass output, you can get a profitable model.
Okay, so what next? What should a young entrepreneur keep in mind to do for the next weeks? So it's very important that you start to give a structure to your business. So first of all, I would suggest, for example, to use a calculator as the one we already have seen here. It's free and it's available and immediately gives you some important data that you can consider, you can adjust, and can actually be the basic pillars of your business. Everybody wants to start with a big company or with a proper sized company, but especially when biological systems are involved in the middle, inconvenience are behind the corner. So the general suggestion is to start little, to see what are the problems that come and to understand and fix them before scaling up. Once you have a big company, it means that you have also big problems. So it's better to start little. It's good to have a clear picture of what is your business from the beginning until the end. So from the substrate sourcing, who is your substrate supplier, what are the conditions, but also who is your product receiver, and what are the pros and the cons of your product offer. So from the beginning, I suggest to find your product receiver and to interact to see how the larvae are fatting well the chickens of your neighbor or of the first customer you have. And do not follow only one source of information. There are hundreds of publications, for example, but sometimes the studies are very niche or relative to small quantities that you cannot then bring to your specific case. Always try to compare your case with what is of the same level and with the people possibly that have a higher level of experience.
Okay, a little bit of, let's say, promotion of us at the end. We do want to, let's say, focus on the mini and small scale and like promote people that they can do profitably BSF business, even not buying from like our products or services. But what we ended up after 4 years of trial and error and becoming our own BSF farmers in Finland is that we wanted to create a simple and cost-effective, but still smart and productive, climatized environment, and that led us to create a product where we can give you a guidance and sourcing materials on repurposing a used shipping container, and we're basically delivering smart control units where that can be turned into a climatized space, especially for the rearing part. We do also provide consultancy and training, and we do recommend that before even considering buying a container or investment, that we can go through our practice and our experience in more concretely. We have focused on mini and small scale production and in decentralized model, but we have now deployed to 10 different countries in 3 continents in the last 6 months, and more or less we've converted potential customers into partners. So we're creating a partner network and enabling other people to create business out of BSF. I'm very happy and thank you for registering to this webinar, and I know that it was a very quick brush over, but we are very happy to continue in the next webinars to go further into the details.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I think it's time for questions, and we have actually quite a few questions in the chat. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's go back into some of the basics. Sean is asking a question: what type of feedstock do you use?
So we can tell from our point, we did start as Manna Insect. Our business model 4 years ago was to start rearing and producing and selling larvae and frass. And when we are in Finland, we don't have a tropical environment, and we did need like a high quality substrate or available that can be used all year round. So we tested with supermarket leftovers and side stream, but eventually we ended up using mainly discarded potatoes directly from farms. And that's how we also led to this idea of containers, because we noticed that in agriculture you have a very high quality food available which the supermarkets are not able to use. So we ended up using potatoes as our main, and then also vegetables. But in the last 4 years we've tested many different substrates, some of them which I care not to remember anymore. I get the smell every time I start reminiscing them.
Okay, then there's a lot of questions regarding the juvenile larvae and the sort of growth period. Let's start with Sean's couple of questions. First of all, how well do the 5 dolls do in manure, and are they really important? I mean, what's the importance of nursing them?
Saverio, do you wanna answer first? I can continue after that.
Okay, yeah, the manure is an incredible source because most of the time it's free or at low cost, and it's rich in nutrients. humans are not the only animal that is truly inefficient and remains a lot of nutrients in the in his residues. So I would try to focus on where is your location, what are actually the regulation. Like the substrate is not everything. The substrate is a part of your business model. So see where you are located, see how well is available your substrate, and then you can adjust your business according to the substrate that is available. In my opinion, especially in Africa, there are excellent examples that manure are actually letting many black swordfly based business to progress very well and scale up.
Yeah, I can continue and say that I think chicken manure is especially like almost like a superfood for larvae. And then it depends on the legislation and the surroundings and what you can use to it, use the larvae and frass for. The other part, which I understood from the question, the nursing part, is actually extremely important and critical, as the larvae, they are very as a larvae, the BSF is extremely robust, but not in the first days of hatching. So you want to provide them an environment where they hatch and grow in their first few critical days, up to, let's say, 5 to 7 days. I think the minimum is 4 days that you should be then transfer that, because still the next 5 days after the nursing period, they're so small that they barely make any dent on the food. And the exponential growth really happens in the last 5 days.
Okay, continuing with aging, is there a nutritional reason for harvesting the larvae at 5-day-old or 18-day-old? What do you think? Rodrigo is asking this question, and I think maybe there's a little bit of misunderstanding, because if you mentioned earlier that the 5 dolls are actually just becoming of the age of actually starting to eat, and there's really nothing there. They're just that really small neonates rather than actual larvae. And then the 18-day-olds, which is really old, are then they are fully grown, and in many cases even overdated, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the neonates larvae are a little bit more sensitive to that kind of factors that can eventually kill some of them. So that's why we prefer to suggest an initial formulation that is well calibrated. It doesn't matter if it costs a little bit more, but considering the cost of the eggs and how critical this phase is better to invest a relatively contained amount of money for feeding the larvae in the first days with an optimal feed, rather than losing a certain percentage of them, because the final substrate it's not ideal for the so little and sensitive larvae in the first days.
Okay, then how long are they at different stages, at pre-pupae, pupae, and how long as a fly until they lay eggs? So how long are the different stages?
There is a documentation on that, but they are, let's say, in roughly as let's say, these are optimal condition estimates. But when the flies mate and the female fly lays eggs, you can expect in average that 3 days after that the larvae starts to hatch. So that's why you need to collect the eggs at least every second day. After that, you can expect the next 4 or 5 days to be the let's say the initial growing stage, and you shouldn't use them before that. And depending on your nutrition and the conditions, you can expect about 10 to 15 days of then the rearing period and the growth period. And this is why we definitely suggest doing it in your own, in a small scale, because you can see the variation and what parameters actually affect the end result of how fast they grow. But it's definitely about the nutrition and climate conditions. And after that, it's another week for the pre-pupal stage, and then up to pupa and 2 weeks to emerge as a fly. So you get about a 6-week cycle from egg to egg. But that can really vary up to like 3 months if the conditions are not optimal. As a larva and pre-pupal, this species is extremely robust to survive long times without food.
Yes, this is actually a really interesting topic, in the sense that actually just yesterday we had this discussion regarding the growth period, and I had some misinformation regarding the growth period, that it couldn't be longer than 14 or 15 days, but I was told that actually it could be much longer, depending on the substrate and the growth condition, and the larvae can even go to this sort of sleeping mode, more or less, if they don't have proper food. So there's definitely a major thing to consider, the climatization of the growth container of a factory or whatever the use case may be, and that is an issue with the backdoor shags, which are not climatized optimally for this growth.
Yeah,
that was
I would just to continue, Tom, on that, and just say that anything where the growth period in total exceeds 21 days, or the actual rearing 14 days, it's the mixture of the substrate or the recipe is not let's say feasible for commercial use. So that's why maybe the 10 to 14 days is a typical let's say guidance and in the information, because it's more or less from the point of view of rearing them professionally.
Yes, there were actually several questions regarding these pupaphages and nutritional level at 10 or 15 day old larvae, but I think you covered all the relevant aspects there. So let's move to Sean's question. He's asking, so 28 degrees Celsius and relative humidity of 70% would be optimal, but Saverio, would you like to comment? It does depend on the whether you're rearing or breeding or different stages of growth period, right?
Yes, absolutely. The larvae is very robust, and in somehow justify young entrepreneurs to try to be lucky with a little bit the conditions, but that's the optimal range. Personally, I have been in greenhouses touching 40 degrees. I was almost fainting, and the larvae were still there, alive, well, and eating. So these larvae are very robust. The point is how well you want them to perform. You want like the substrate reduction done in 10 days. You want the optimal size of the larvae done in the shortest of the time. Then you have to go for what are the parameters identified as the optimal one. And actually studies and also experiences on the field are conveying that those are the optimal parameters. But never forget to test on the field the larvae you receive, the eggs you receive, with the substrate you want to use, especially in your environment. And for outdoor activities, everything we are saying in this Q&A now, it should be proved season after season. I have seen expert black sword flies farmers or even companies moving the location and having problems unexpected considering their level of knowledge.
Okay. We just have a little bit of time to ask a few questions. So, gentlemen, can I ask very short answers to the next few ones? Emily is asking how much food to put in each tray.
I can say that it's our recommendation from 5 to 8 kilos is based on two factors. The 5 kilo is that for 600 to 400 tray, that's the minimum that would allow, let's say, a commercial production, so that you're effectively utilizing the space. But 8 kilos comes from the fact that the larvae is not really well in swimming or, let's say, drilling to very deep depths. So if possible to get, I would recommend to start by putting 5 kilos of food and then about 10,000 larvae, which is about half a gram of equivalent eggs, and then start the recipe testing from there. And if they eat less than 8 days, then the next batch add a little bit more food, but don't get greedy like we did and increase it to 10 kilos, because definitely you will start to get, let's say, failures much more.
Okay, then there's a question from Daniel, which probably I can answer. So how do we get this equipment to start off? Well, go to the Manna website, www.mannainsect.com, fill out the contact form, and there are business development specialists who will help you out understanding different business cases and scenarios, what kind of equipment should be used, and to get started with your rearing. Then, question from Phil: what is the egg yield per kilo of live larvae?
That's actually Saverio, do you want to answer that? I think it's a tough question.
Yeah, well, I think it's very complicated to give an exact answer, because I think for example, with the Manna system you can get is completely different from an outdoor farming activity. These phases are very critical. Are you exposing the adults to natural or artificial lights? Are you gathering the eggs in the proper and safe way? Is your hatching rate very efficient? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you get a ton or a kg of eggs. It's very important, the hatching rate and how you treat the neonates. That's why we are suggesting to use even a specific substrate formulation for the first day of life of the larvae.
Yeah, I would say that let's say the adding more pupa just in case, for the purpose that about 50% will be female, and then of course the females are the only one laying eggs. The adding more pupa is cheaper in that sense to add in quantity, compared to that you have to be very quality on the other side of hatching rates, and there you can make a big mistake if the mortality rate is high.
Okay. Then a quick question from Christelle. What about the light during rearing? And somebody else was also asking about what kind of artificial lighting should be used.
Well, we have used so-called BSF LEDs. There are not that many companies. 4 years ago when we started, there were actually only one company doing that. But if you Google BSF LEDs, LEDs, you will find companies that have specific BSF lights. We don't have a lot of experience like experimenting of different kinds of lights, but what we have seen from other people, even normal, let's say, supermarket LEDs could work as well. But at least we don't have like a practical knowledge, so we recommend to buy LEDs that have been specifically designed for BSF.
Okay. Then the question from Fangnon, are there any diseases or disease challenges in BSF rearing? And I would actually like to add that perhaps you could compare the sort of continuous process to this batch process.
Okay, if I may answer. Okay, so we suggest to work in batch because what we have seen that keeping the organic matter in the same environment could lead to some unwanted contaminations. So working in a batch system, it not only guarantees that you can divide your production in specific lots, and if something goes wrong, you know exactly that batch, that production is referred in that specific moment, and you can isolate that production, and you can eventually see what didn't work well. With the continuous, you cannot do it. Indeed, any kind of food production or drug production is in a batch way rather than in a continuous way, even though it's a little bit more expensive. And related to the possible direct disease that the black soldier fly can carry with them, compared to other bioagents, we can say that the black soldier fly are very good at containing disease. There are publications that show that a contaminated substrate with salmonella and other important disease is being actually contained and even reduced during the black soldier fly activity. So from this point of view, the entrepreneur that decides to use the black soldier fly can sleep quite well at the night. Besides, the black soldier fly have some antimicrobial property in their oil, and they are very robust. There are not alarming diseases related to the animal that may give us the hint that tomorrow there might be something that can kill all the larvae in the business.
All right. Then we had a couple of questions regarding energy consumption. And if I may start by saying that, first of all, the energy, like Uka mentioned earlier, the energy prices have increased quite significantly in Europe, and the differences in energy prices and, of course, the energy consumption in different models is very different. But one of the sort of key features of the Manna container is the energy efficiency. But what does that mean, Uka? How much does Manna's container consume? And how is there a possibility to use these energy prices also in the calculations?
Yeah, so it became, let's say the first year we focused on just getting the equipment to work in a very closed environment where you put 3 to 4 tons of bio waste and larvae inside. But very quickly we turned one of the key, let's say, focused on the key advantage of making it very small in energy consumption, so you can go off grid with solar panels. In a typical case, the container itself is less than a bread toaster, about 600 watts. We have containers in India which are on average half of what we say in our website, which is 1 kilowatt continuous consumption. We are about 500 to 600 watts on an average consumption, so about a refrigerator level. And that is definitely an important factor, because it's no matter how well you can rear and breed, if the energy consumption cost will basically diminish all your profits. So that's a very important part of our development, to make sure that the power consumption is low. And you can do, even without the infrastructure, you can do it with purely solar panels.
Okay, can you deeper into solar panels. I think there was also one question regarding that. Manna's system is solar power compatible?
Yes, especially of course in areas where solar and sun is much more visible than we have here in Finland, which at the moment is about 2 hours per day. It's about 4 kilowatt solar panel system with 10 to 14 kilowatt hours of battery backup system. That's like an average case that we've had that can cover either fully off grid or mainly off grid, and then you can have like a backup power, or if you have an electricity grid, you can use that as a possible backup.
All right. I think we're running out of time, but just a couple of quick ones. So Pantelis is asking how many people are using Manna, and do you have data from all of them? So quickly, I can answer that in 10 countries in 3 different continents. Uka, what about the data? You're collecting data on all different customers and business cases.
Yes,
right?
we collect data. A lot of data on the control and the sensors for the purpose of optimizing the conditions adaptively to the best possible cases, but also for the analysis of the customers to look at their production efficiency and predict the rearing cycles and let's say the performance of the recipes. And we do have it, everything is remotely monitored, so all the data and conditions in the container will go to a database that is available to our customers.
And continuing with that, Naftali is asking, do you have experience with micro/mini scale operations in more urban settings? And
well,
who were the final customers in these cases, if you have that data available?
Yeah, so we have been ourselves fairly urban. We work in a almost in the center of a small city here in Lapland, and we had neighbors in 50 meters that were just regular people living there, and we had 6 containers in our yard, which we operated for 2 years. So the main challenges we had initially was to reduce the odor in those peak moments when the larvae is eating very rapidly at the last few days, and the ammonium is a very distinctive smell. But we got along with the neighbors eventually. But yeah, it is a challenge, and there are a few ways to reduce the odor when it's very close to let's say habitats.
Still 2 questions for Uka. Alvaro is asking, do you have projects in Central America or Latin America?
Well, we have a lot of interest from there, and of course we are planning and we are looking into partners and assembly partners. Like I think it was indirectly mentioned that the containers, 90% of the containers are made locally, so the shipping container is sourced locally. And also the insulation materials and all the other materials and equipment based on our shopping list is ordered and assembled locally in a few days, and then we ship the control unit, which is more or less size of a briefcase, from Finland. So in our model, we are looking partners and let's say companies that can assemble the container locally and work with that. But yes, we have a lot of let's say cases coming, but currently we don't have container in South America yet.
Okay, is there a big part of automation in the containers you build, or are you also building rearing units with lab cages? So that was from Nicholas.
Yeah, okay. So just to give an idea, and maybe it's visible in this picture on the top right, is that the automation in our case means software control of the climate conditions and all the equipment, which are basically a normal hardware store level equipment. We call them dumb, simple devices that we turn into smart devices. Otherwise, it's an empty space that can be stacked with trays, insect trays, or then breeding cages depending on the let's say the application, but both are possible because the control of the climate is based on software target values for both cases. So we're not, there's no robotics or automated lines inside the container.
Yeah, so I guess that's one of the main differences to, for example, the big factories that, when you build $1 million factory or $5 million factory, there's a certain level of automation, whereas the container is automated from the sense of climatization and the process, but you load and unload manually, right?
Yeah, maybe using a pallet truck like we have, and we can, if you contact us, we have material and videos of our own processes, how we do use pallet trucks. And this is, let's say, a compromise when you're doing it in mini and small scale and in decentralized way, is that the level of automation that's typical in decentralized factories is too complex and too costly to consider in a small scale, and typically the let's say the hours of work and labor is such small that is so you don't have to automate every process.
Okay, seems like there's at least two dozen questions more that have come in. So unfortunately, we don't have time to go through everything. We're running out of time. One final question, a couple of questions regarding the climatization. So is it necessary to use a climatized container if you're living in a tropical or subtropical area? And what would be the benefit of using a climatized container in such area?
Well, we did ask that question of ourselves. Of course, when we are in Finland, there's no question, we have to climatize. But our first customers were from Kenya, where actually had a very good condition. But still, mostly the nights are cooler than 25. So the production, the rearing and breeding will partially stop during that time. You might have rainy seasons, you have extreme, I think actually the biggest problem is when it goes over 33 degrees. Because then it's very hard. You can't cool effectively when you're outdoors. So you will lose batches. You might not be predictable. So the couple of weeks can be, let's say, fairly disastrous, and you will have like a monsoon season and dry season and all that. So we have cases in tropical conditions, especially where the heat is a challenge. And of course, I still recommend starting outdoor and not just completely by our, let's say, message, and you will learn in a micro and mini scale when you rear outdoors and these, if that environment is suitable to be reared directly, or if a climatization is needed.
So you have several cases running across Africa, but a specific question from Sibusi. So do you have any projects in South of Africa particularly?
South Africa, yes. We do in South Africa, but south of Africa, like Zimbabwe or these kind of countries near South Africa, no, we don't have. We have discussions, but we don't have a container.
Yeah, it was a specific question regarding especially South Africa. But thank you, gentlemen. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so we need to leave the other questions for later. For all participants, thank you for joining. Feel free to join our upcoming webinars. We will have at least 5 webinars in the course of the first half of 2023. You can find all the registration links, all the topics, all the dates, and of course, if you register to the webinars, you will get a recording of all these webinars in your inbox. You can find all of the information at our website, www.mannainsect.com. And if you have any specific questions regarding training, consultation, the Manna breeding containers and rearing containers and business case evaluation, all that is accessible through our business development people. When you go to the website mannainsect.com, go and fill out the contact form, and they will be in touch with you, either sending you proper materials, video, animations, 3Ds, or in some cases arranging Teams meetings and so forth. Thank you, Saverio and Uka. we'll wrap up here. Thank you, Jonas, for setting up the technical aspects of the webinar. Feel free to send us LinkedIn invitations. You can find us on LinkedIn and follow our LinkedIn page as well. Until next time, see you in February. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here today. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.